Hey guys, welcome back to Bible Fun with the Nuns. Today we're studying John chapter 3. Let's get started.
Okay, John chapter 3, let's get started. This may be, aside from maybe Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. This chapter may be one of the most famous chapters in the whole Bible because this is a chapter that's split between two people that we've heard a lot about. The first one is a man named Nicodemus, and the other is about a guy named John the Baptist. But both of them are only significant because of their interaction with Jesus. So this chapter gives us the most famous verse probably in the whole Bible, which is John 3:16. Do you know John 3:16?
Mm-hmm.
All right, can you quote it for us?
For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life.
Yeah, exactly. So whenever we're reading through this, I'm going to preach on Sunday, by the way. I'm going to preach on Jesus meeting with Nicodemus because I mean, when you're trying to pick what you're going to teach from John chapters 1 through 5, I mean, good grief, you got to talk about John 3:16. You got to talk about Jesus and Nicodemus. And so my takeaways really came from not Jesus and Nicodemus today. They came from Jesus and John the Baptist. Now, here's what I like about John the Baptist. I like that John the Baptist is a guy who knew who he was, and he did not need to pretend to be anything different than he was. So John the Baptist never needed to be famous. He never needed to be popular. He never needed to be cool. He never needed to be a celebrity. All John the Baptist ever really needed was to be a faithful servant of Jesus. We would call him a good and faithful servant of Jesus. Now, to get this, I want you to look at verse 21. Verse 21 says, But he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen. What does that mean? That means that what we do is eventually going to prove who we are, that they have been done in God. And after these things, Jesus and his disciples came into the land of Judea, and they remained there with them, and they baptized. And so John is a guy who shows up in this story, but John is not a guy who is holding on to popularity. Before Jesus comes on the scene, John is collecting like a huge congregation of followers. Everybody is coming to John. They're coming in droves to John. But here's what happens. As Jesus begins to kind of come into his own and reveal himself, the crowds start going to Jesus. Now, we would assume that if everybody stopped coming to worship with us and started going to worship somewhere else, we would go, what in the world is the problem? But John said, this is not a problem. This is actually the way it should be. And John is going to give a famous line here. He says that Jesus must increase and I must decrease. This is the attitude of a good and faithful servant, where the more and more we live for God, the more and more we discover that he's got to become ever more important in our lives, and we have to get more and more humble and put ourselves last. He is first, we are last, because he is the master and we are the servant. And so it seems here that John is actually okay with all of this that's happening, and I'm going to tell you why. Because when you read through this story, John is going to give us an illustration. He says, he who has the bride is the bridegroom. So now he's talking about weddings, a groom marrying a bride. He says, but the friend of the bridegroom, we would call that the best man, he stands and he hears him, and he rejoices when he hears the bridegroom's voice. So John the Baptist is telling a story, and he says, think of me and Jesus like a groom and his best man on the wedding day. He says the wedding day is not really about the bride in this story. It's about the bride and the groom. It's their marriage together. He said the one person there who does serve a purpose, but it's not about him, is the best man. Now, the best man has some responsibilities, but it's not his wedding. He says, as a matter of fact, the thing that most excites the best man is that the groom gets to marry his bride. And so, in this story, he talks about how he feels. He says, but the friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices. Now, what's the root of the word rejoice? It's the word joy. He said he rejoices at the sound of the bridegroom's voice. Well, let me tell you a little bit about John the Baptist. Do you remember the story of when John the Baptist was inside his mama's belly? Luke chapter 1, we read this in conjunction in like right beside the Christmas story every year. And so listen to Luke chapter 1 verse 44. It says, Mary has just walked in the room. Elizabeth, which is John the Baptist's mother, hears Mary say, "Hey Mary, hey Elizabeth, I'm here. I'm here to see you." And here it says in verse 44, and it says, "Indeed, as soon as the voice of your greeting sounded in my ears, the baby," who's the baby? John the Baptist, "leaped in my womb for joy." John the Baptist's joy always came from hearing Jesus come near. It was never in him being the most popular person. He is a good and a faithful servant. He is not the main character of the story, and he wants to live his life where Jesus is clearly the main character. Okay? What was your takeaway from this?
So, I like the part where it was talking about how, where Jesus was talking about how in order to enter the kingdom of heaven, that you must be born again, and, Nicodemus, he asks, what does that mean? Do you actually physically get born again? And he explains that no, that's not what happens, and there's actual birth and then there's spiritual birth when you get saved, and you have to be born again spiritually to enter the kingdom of heaven.
That's right. That's right. So, John, you're right on track with this. So, we're in John chapter number 3 tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're going to be in John chapter number 4, where Jesus is going to meet a woman at the well. And what we're going to find is that the good news of Jesus isn't just for the Jewish people. It's not just for Pharisees like Nicodemus, and it's not just for the forerunner of Jesus like John the Baptist. The good news is for even the Samaritans, and from there, from beyond to the rest of the world, for people like us. So we're looking forward to reading that. We'll see you tomorrow in John chapter number 4. Bye.
Bye.